Memories of past are often painful. They give us pain whenever we think of them. So, should we continue to be troubled by the past? I am sure majority of you would say a big no to this because we all know that we should live in the present and entertain always constructive thoughts. Well, we will understand this better as we proceed with the chapter named The Address from Snapshots Book of Standard 11 CBSE. It is written by Marga Minco. Hello, dear students. This is Susma Singh, and you are watching Booster Classes. Students, I would recommend you all to watch the video till the end. And yes, if you have not subscribed to my YouTube channel yet, hit the subscribe button right now and get benefited. In this module, I'm going to give you the core of this short story in an extremely coherent and lucid manner so that you can apprehend with ease the setting of the story, its plot, the climax, and the theme. I'll also talk about the character traits of the main characters as well as there will be a few important questions at the end for your comprehension check. Before we begin with the story, let me give you its overview. The short story, The Address, paints the horrible pictures of the inhuman Nazis' atrocities on the European Jews during the Second World War. It gives an account of the pain, grief, and mental torture the survivors of wars have to go through. And this is brought out through an emotional account of a daughter who has survived the war and goes in search of her mother's precious belongings after the war in Holland got over and things became almost normal. She does find them but decides not to claim any of the belongings because in strange surroundings her belongings too appear strange to her. The address lost all its significance for her and she wanted to forget it. The girl's decision to move on in life gives the story an optimistic twist. Well, now with the help of a story map, students, I am going to make you comprehend the storyline of this emotional story. We all know that every story has five important elements like setting, plot, climax, characters, and theme. Now, one by one, we will discuss all these elements. So, first and foremost, let's take a look at the setting of this short story. Setting is actually the time and place a story takes place, and this emotional story begins with a victim of war who is the narrator over here going back to her native place. Actually, the narrator was told by her mother to remember number 46 Marconi Street where Mrs. Darling lived. Mrs. Darling was the one who had insisted on keeping things safely till the war was over. So, after the war, when things returned to normalcy and peace was restored, and also out of curiosity to see and touch her mother's possession to which her mother's memories were associated, the narrator went to meet Mrs. Darling in order to claim her valuable belongings. But Mrs. Darling never let her in to see her belongings. She literally refused to recognize her, told her that it was not convenient for her to talk to her at that point of time. Indeed, Mrs. Darling was cold and indifferent and evidently displeased to see the narrator. She even expressed her surprise because she hoped that the war would uproot the entire family and they would never return to claim their belongings. She had no intention of returning the valuables. Proceeding further, we will now comprehend its plot, which is nothing but the series of events that make up a story. And the first event of the plot of the story is narrators reaching the right address. When Mrs. Dorning denied entrance to the narrator, she thought that the woman was not Mrs. Dorning because she had seen her only once for a brief interval, and that 2 years back. She thought perhaps she was mistaken and had rung the wrong bell. However, on looking at the dress the woman was wearing, that is, the green knitted cardigan which her mother used to wear, narrator was now very much certain that she had made no mistake and she had reached the right address. Now, when Mrs. Dorling saw that she was glancing at the cardigan, she tried to half hid herself again behind the door. And this reaction convinced the narrator that she had reached the right address. As the story progresses, now we will come to know who had actually given the narrator the address, when and under what circumstances. So now we find that on the way back to the station, the narrator got lost in her old memories and started recalling how she received the address of Mrs. Dorling from her mother. When she was at home during the first half of the war, the narrator, being a keen observer, she noticed that various things were missing in the room. At that moment, her mother told her about Mrs. Dorling and gave her this particular address. Actually, what happened when the Second World War broke out, the Jews were persecuted by the Nazis. Mrs. Dorling, an old acquaintance, took charge of this background and very cunningly she renewed their contact. She indeed exploited Mrs. S. fears and insecurity during the war. She assured and suggested that she would keep their belongings safely until the war was over. And she took away all the precious things like the table silver, antique plates, woolen tablecloth, and so on every time she left that place. However, now the narrator sized up Mrs. Dorling's intention. She did not like her excessive interest in her mother's belonging, and she did not approve of her mother's over concern about Mrs. Dorling. Let's now know about the narrator's second visit. And here, students, we have come to the turning point of the story, I mean the climax. Actually, after her first visit went in vain, she decided to visit there the second time. And this time the narrator was fortunate enough to enter into Mrs. Dorling's house because she was taken inside by her daughter. As soon as the narrator entered, she was horrified by whatever she saw inside the room. The room was full of their valuable belongings. She found herself surrounded by things that she wanted to see and touch again. And for a moment, she felt as if she were in her room, in her own room. However, seeing those things did not give her any pleasure. She felt uneasy and she was filled with disgust because she found her precious belongings arranged tastelessly and handled in insensitive way. She was so much hurt to see that their value was not at all appreciated. Hence, when she found her possessions, belongings in an ugly setting, she felt that she did not know the room. She patiently watched each and every items, which clouded her mind with strange emotions and evoked the memories of past. She became nostalgic and started recalling her mother, and she felt sorry for her tragic death. She was so repelled by this bitter experience that she did not even wait for Mrs. Darling and decided to leave the place without claiming her belongings and forget the address. Finally, we have come to the falling action of the plot, which is, her final resolution. The narrator resolved to forget the address. She wanted to break off with the past and move on. She came back without claiming her belongings. And that is the reason she came back without claiming her belonging. She could not connect a cell with the belongings. All her belongings had lost their charm and emotional values as they had been removed and put in strange surroundings. She knew that if taken back, they would again seem strange in her new small rented room. It would be the oddest place to accommodate her expensive possessions. Those things would only be the grim reminder of the tragedy she had underwent. Hence, the pain of loss and frustrations and helplessness in her mind made her decide to forget the address and move on. So, with this, students, we have covered almost three important elements of the story, that is the setting, the plot, and the climax. Now, let's take a look at the two main characters who we are already introduced to. Mrs. S, who is the narrator's mother, she is a very simple and trusting woman. She did not see through Mrs. Darling's plan to cheat her out of her valuables. She was indeed grateful to Mrs. Darling for what she was doing for them. She, being kind-hearted, she was worried about the physical risk to Mrs. Darling than losing her valuables to her. Talking about Mrs. Darling, who was a Jewish lady with a broad back. She was an opportunist and materialistic who renewed her contact primarily to take the antique things the narrator's mother owned. Mrs. Darling was very rude and uncharitable with the narrator. She did not allow her enter the house, in spite of the narrator's repeated request. She was a wicked and selfish lady, we can say. She did not wish to part with Mrs. S. belongings. Now, talking about the theme of this story, we can say that with the Second World War and the Holocaust as the background, the story brings out the sufferings of the people during wars, and it teaches us that we should let bygones be bygones. We should not allow past to adversely affect our present or determine our future. It also lays stress on honesty and fair play because greed breeds ill will and selfishness. So, with this, we have concluded the story, which is a very emotional account. I hope you all must have got the in-depth explanation of this story. Talking about the aptness of the title, we can say that the title of the story, The Address, is perfectly a befitting one because the whole action centers around number 46 Marconi Street, which is the address. The title is even quite suggestive and occurs at the beginning, middle, and end of the story. The author focuses the reader's attention on it by the narrator's doubt if she was mistaken and her self-assurance that she had reached the correct address. The middle part of the story reveals how she came to know about the address. The story ends dramatically with the narrator's resolution of forgetting the address. Here are a few important questions for your comprehension check. So without fail, give an attempt to solve them and deepen your understanding. You can take help from the explanation which I have just given to you. I am extremely hopeful that you all must have got the in-depth explanation of this short story. Keep watching and keep learning. Thank you.